Okay, my eyes look really red, and I promise you, I've not been crying, and I'm not high. I'm just very tired, and I was rubbing them for a long time as I was setting this up. Um, Hi, welcome back. Um, Last week's video was a bit of a weird one. It's sort of a learning experience, I think, for both of us, and yeah, so I'm trying it again. I'm not doing, as you can tell, I'm not using a microphone today. I'm trying to see if the audio is any better here. I'm really kind of struggling with figuring out audio issues, and I'm apologize for that. I apologize for that. That was not a sentence I said before. Yeah, I'm still working through a lot of it and trying to figure it out. So I appreciate you all for bearing with me, all 12 of you that are here. But yeah, I was thinking about today's topic a lot over the past couple of days since making the last video, and it's this idea about identity and self-betterment. What I've been trying to work through is this idea that I tend to put myself into these boxes for my identity. And for the longest time specifically, I've lived in this mentality that, I was broken, that because of my past and the people I've hurt and the things I've done, I'm broken, I'm messed up, I'm jaded, whatever you want to call it. And I've lived that truth, and that had become sort of everything about me, internally. That's what I lived out, and as a result, my life started to reflect that, because that's the truth that I was feeding, and allowing to kind of, and it's not necessarily calling it truth, but it was true to me, you know what I mean? I was allowing that to become my identity, that everything around my life sort of fell into place to support that idea, you know what I mean? It's really just like a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you manifest those things, your life sort of corrects itself to make those things true. And as a result, for the longest time, I lived a life of someone who saw themselves as broken, irredeemable, I stopped myself from having good things come my way because I didn't think I deserved them. I sabotaged relationships because I didn't think I was worthy of them. Really, it was a lot of self-sabotage. Not like a comedic amount of self-sabotage. All in the name of trying to support this idea of who my identity was, or what my identity was, as someone who wasn't worth those things and worth good things. And since my time, or since the breakup rather, and I've been trying to make efforts into becoming, what I think, and, I'm putting air quotes, but better, trying to improve myself in a lot of ways by, it's my 12th week in a row going on runs consistently, and I'm noticing changes there, and, doing a lot of internal work about learning to accept myself and love myself for who I am. And, I'm practicing Spanish a lot more to improve myself. I'm doing these like brain games to improve myself. I'm writing a lot more. I'm making these videos, but I, was realizing that there were points where I would just have an off day, you know what I mean? Or, things would not go the way that I would have wanted them to, or I slipped up in some sort of way, in my mind, whether I got upset at something, or, I experienced a little bit of frustration during traffic, and things that kind of trigger these thoughts of well, crap, you're not really getting better, are you? Because you slipped up there, or, it's clear that you've still got a long way to go. I was realizing that I had now switched my identity from this self-loathing, self-deprecating kind of person to someone who is making self-betterment my identity rather than something that I was doing. You know, I was having a conversation with a friend, I want to say a couple weeks ago, if not a month ago, um, just about everything, post the breakup. And what they had said to me was, what do you mean by get better? What does that exactly look like to you? Like, are you not, it's not about the things that you loathe about yourself or wish that you could change, but why don't you like who you are now? And that, I mean, that was one, something that I definitely needed to hear. Um, but two, it really kind of put things into perspective of like, well, yeah, what does that look like? And it had really only clicked then that when I really gave it thought, this idea of self-betterment, I really didn't have a clear vision of what that really looked like for me. I have, there are these vague ideas of what I needed to do, in terms of, like internal work of, wanting to be someone who was more intentional and more honest and wasn't as cowardly, um, who would speak their mind, or, again, just very vague ideas. There's nothing set in stone of like, what does that look like in practice? And what does that look like as an end goal, something to achieve? And I was realizing that, yeah, I had supplemented that as my identity, and I kept pushing the goalpost only further and further. And it wouldn't have mattered what I had achieved. It doesn't matter that I'm 12 weeks into my running as an exercise, and allowing myself to kind of be proud of that. It was like, well, I just got to keep going because I don't feel healthier, or I don't feel like I look in the mirror and feel healthier, and it's like, it really was never going to be enough, because I kept trying to push it further and further, you know what I mean? Instead of really sitting with myself and allowing myself to love who I am now as a person, and to know also that there are things that I can work on to be better. There, of course, self-improvement is not necessarily a bad thing at all. But I think when we become hyperfixed on it, or hyperfixated on it, excuse me, that was not a word, hyperfixated on those things, that's where it becomes an issue. Because again, you're constantly at this never-ending race, never really giving yourself grace, never giving yourself a pat on the back to be like, look, you've come far, you've seen your progress, you become blind to it, honestly. And again, that in of itself kind of becomes its own form of self-hatred and self-deprecation, because you're not allowing yourself to celebrate those victories that you've made. You know what I mean? Victories that you wouldn't have made, even a couple years ago, and as a past version of yourself. And that's tough, living with that is tough. And then just trying to find that identity is really tough too. Especially as someone, for me, speaking as someone in their late 20s, about to be 30, which is, yeah, it's difficult trying to find who you are as a person. For me specifically, I've spent a lot of my life living for the comfort of others, being a major people pleaser, wanting to be liked by everybody by any means necessary, no matter what that cost to me, whether that was me being true to myself or honest with others. I wanted people to like me. And now that I'm trying to figure out who I am, I'm finding that that is a lot trickier than it maybe would have been if I had been given the chance to do that earlier in my life. Because what I'm finding is that when you are trying to figure out who you are, you really, really, like, I cannot stress this out, you really need to be secure in yourself, or at least start to get secure and comfortable with yourself, knowing that you're just trying to figure it out, and you're allowed to not know, and you're allowed to kind of feel a little awkward about it, as you kind of, I don't really know of another word, but like experiment is the only way I can say it. But I know that word kind of has its own weird connotations to it, and I don't really mean that necessarily. I just mean that you're trying to figure out, who are you? I think for me personally, I think maybe there's a part of me that feels that I was meant to be an extrovert, but because of how my life played out, I think maybe I was not always allowed to be an extrovert. And so as a result, I'm now introverted. I'm very uncomfortable with vocalizing things or being vocal in general. Even with this, yeah, it's super difficult for me to film and look at myself in the camera and feel confident about that. Again, this is part of the work of trying to figure that out. But when you are trying to figure that out, you come to notice that a lot of people who knew or know who you are, they're not necessarily as gracious with understanding that you are just trying to figure out who you are. You know what I mean? And I don't mean that is their fault necessarily. I don't think there's any fault to be given. I just think it's the way things are sometimes, especially to talk about it in a broader sense. Like, as a society, we really don't give people a lot of room to grow or learn as people. We're very this is a very strong word, but we're very vindictive, I think, in a lot of ways, of like, no, this is who you are. You are this person. You've done these things. That's it. You cannot change. And I think when we do try to kind of figure out who we are and, learn this new identity, what that looks like, what feels comfortable, what doesn't, oftentimes the people who know you will not always be supportive because they may not understand what you're trying to do. And you yourself may not have words to give it. You just know that you are trying to figure that out, but then you try that out in front of people you may know, and they kind of respond in a way that's like, what are you doing? And you internally might be like, oh God, I can't do that. Maybe I'm not that then, because I don't like the way they responded to that, even though it might have felt good to me to kind of be more loud or be more silly or say something I normally wouldn't have said. I don't like the response, so I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to try back. No, maybe I am an introvert. Maybe I need to stick to that. And it's tough, it's tough having to deal with that, because it does kind of feel like you're kind of you against the world, trying to piece the puzzle together of who you are. I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot, and I apologize if I am, but and I say this all as if I don't really have an answer to what that looks like or to how that feels. Truthfully, I'm still trying to figure that out myself. I just think it's something that we should be aware of, that it's okay for figuring yourself out to feel a little uncomfortable. It's okay to kind of push back on the pushback that you might get from other people. I think being in tune with yourself often requires a lot of you having to maybe disagree with what other people may think of you, and ultimately coming to a point where you don't care what other people think about you, because you are secure in who you are, that identity no longer can be shaken from you. But I think until you reach that point, it really is, it's like a tightrope walk. You're really having to balance out the perception others have of you versus the perception you have of yourself, and really trying to marry those two in a way that isn't something that ultimately compromises you, and isn't something that leaves you still as a people pleaser, but as someone who is comfortable in their own skin. Yeah, that's what I've been thinking about lately. And again, I'm not there yet. I'm still very much trying to figure out who I am, because I've always lived in this idea of who am I in tandem with this person or that person. You know what I mean? I find my identity a lot in what people think about me, you know. I've lived a whole life of being kind of seen as this good person, and I think that in a lot of ways I've allowed myself to self-sabotage by thinking, well, you're not really good because you've messed up before and you've made mistakes before, and so you clearly aren't a good person because a good person wouldn't do those things. And having that overthinking brain can really mess things up, because it's like there's room for nuance. Those two things can be true at once. That yes, you can be a good person and others tell you that you're a good person, and know yourself that you're good, but you also can still make mistakes. You're imperfect, and that's okay. That's the beauty of being a human, you know, a person, and it's okay. But I think for me, I just got bogged down in that mentality of, well, a good person wouldn't do those things, you know, a better person wouldn't have done those things, and then just allow that to continue to snowball further into self-deprecation, into self-hatred, that, you know, it's taking me this long to kind of unlearn a lot of that and give myself grace and give myself the chance, the ability to keep trying, you know, that I can start over, and that I can make changes, you know, to be who I want to be. And yeah, it's a long and complicated journey, and if anyone else feels the same or is going through something similar, know that I'm right there with you. It's hard, and a part of me kind of feels like it's not meant to be easy. I don't know. That's like maybe another topic for another day, of whether or not life is supposed to be easy or not. But I think above all else, continue to give yourself grace. You know, we're all trying to figure ourselves out, and this world is crazy enough, and the last thing we need to be is crazy for ourselves. So yeah, I hope that made sense. I hope that was somewhat coherent. I hope this was somewhat audible. I'm about to listen back to this, and if it's not, you can barely hear me, I might crash out, actually, because I've been on for 15 or like 18 minutes or something like that. So anyway, I hope you guys are doing well. I'm not going to promise that I'm going to try to, you know, that I'm going to post a lot more frequently, but I'm really going to make I'm going to try to figure it out, you know, when to post these. I'm posting this right as I'm getting off of work for my second job, and I've got to be at my other job early in the morning. And so I'm just trying to find out time when it feels comfortable, and, you know, in a way that I can make it to where I'm not having to get all this equipment, and make it worth your while, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I still want these things to be something that they're listenable, you know. It's not, you know. Anyway, I'm rambling too much now. I hope you're well. Take care of yourself. Know that you are loved, and know that you are not alone. And I will talk to you in the next video. Bye.